Welcome to the Liberty Alert with Gregory Seltz, sponsored by our friends at the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberties here in Washington, D.C., a program that cuts through the chaos and confusion in the culture today by talking two-kingdom citizenship, bold biblical principles for a robust public Christian life. And now your host, Dr. Gregory Seltz.
Good day, Washington, D.C. I'm Dr. Gregory Seltz. Welcome to the Liberty Alert, where every week we do try to cut through the noise and take on the issues, especially the public issues that matter to people of faith. And this week we're going to preempt our previously scheduled programming. We were supposed to interview Ryan Tucker, not Tucker Carlson, Ryan Tucker. Ryan works with Alliance Defending Freedom. Our program with him will air, I think, in 2 weeks now instead of today. It's been preempted because this last week we had a public issue that is of real concern to the church, is of real concern to our culture, and it was the oral arguments concerning the DOBBS case before the Supreme Court. And I was privileged to be there at the Supreme Court and to take it all in. In my earpiece, I was listening to the oral arguments inside the chamber, and outside I was walking around and recording and talking to people, but mostly just listening to what people were saying, because you'll be surprised at some of the things that I'm going to share with you today on our program, as well as I'm going to play some clips of some of the things that I heard there on the steps. And to me, that is the issue, because whatever the Supreme Court does, and I really do believe this, based on a lot of the things I heard outside, I think the issue before the Supreme Court is whether or not Roe v. Wade is constitutional. People of goodwill need to understand it's not in the Constitution. I mean, the Constitution guarantees inalienable rights of the right to life, liberty, and the virtuous self-disciplined pursuit of happiness. And the government's supposed to undergird that, and it's not supposed to trample on that whatsoever. Well, you can't say the right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and the pursuit of abortion. It's not in the Constitution. Now, if you wanted to put it in the Constitution, you could have an amendment process, and you could do that. We actually prohibited liquor in the whole country of America by amending the Constitution at one point in our history. That'd be the way to properly, it would never happen, because the idea that a person has the right to actually kill a human being, there's no constitutional right to say, well, we can kill certain people and not other people. So again, the whole notion of abortion being a constitutional issue is egregious, and that eventually will work its way out constitutionally. But that doesn't mean that the issue will go away. And the fact, actually dealing with the real issue of pro-life, which is pro-life, pro-family, pro-child, all these different things that have to actually be built back into our culture, that work is still going to go on. And you'll hear that in some of the things that we talk about out on the steps of the Supreme Court. And so even if the justices do what I think is right and overturn Roe v. Wade, I think that's just the beginning of us becoming a culture of life again. So again, to keep it simple, this issue is about a case down in Mississippi, the DOBBS versus the Jackson Healthcare Center. The DOBBS case is about whether or not the state can limit the practice of abortion to 15 weeks. And by the way, one of the arguments before the court today was, 90% of all countries in the West outlaw abortion after 15 weeks. We're the only country that says this barbaric practice can go on long after the baby's heart is beating and long after the child is formed completely in the womb. When you get an ultrasound and you see the baby in the womb, you're not getting rid of an appendix. You are not getting rid of a tumor. You are getting rid of a human being. And every other country in the West has said this practice, whatever it is, it can't exist after 15 weeks. And so that's all the Mississippi law is doing, is restricting it. And then, of course, people are saying, yeah, but the Constitution guarantees. Well, the question is, it shouldn't be a constitutional issue. That was one of the things that was argued today inside the courtroom, is that, I think it was Justice Kavanaugh that argued that the Constitution is neutral on abortion. I think that's overstating that position. It's not neutral, but even if it is neutral, he's saying that the Constitution is not the place to resolve this issue. It's supposed to be resolved in the state legislatures among your elected representatives. And to that degree, I agree with him. But I don't think the Constitution is neutral, because the right to life is not a neutral thing. You either believe that people have inherent dignity or an inherent protection for life, or you don't. I think that's the new theme for the March for Life this year, too. And that is, equality begins in the womb. And again, protecting the most vulnerable among us. That's the ultimate role of the state, is to protect that which is vulnerable. Well, a child in the womb is the most vulnerable human being in our culture. So, is abortion a constitutional protection? The answer has always been no, except there were 7 justices who at one time made up a right and said, well, it's not in there, but we'll say it is. And that was the Roe v. Wade decision. Now, one of the things I heard over and over again today is 7 men in black robes decided. You know, the sad part about it is we're going to have to get back to a healthy understanding of male-female here, healthy understanding of dads and moms here, because the idea, and this, I heard it on both sides. I heard the Roe v. or the pro-choice people lambasting men, and then I heard pro-life people talking about the patriarchy in men. And I said, oh, wait a minute. First of all, these were several liberal men. You can't hate, they can't be blamed on both sides of the aisle. I mean, there were men who disagreed with these people back in those days. In fact, these 7 justices decided something that the country basically didn't want back in then. You know, most of the legislation that was happening in the states at the time of Roe was actually very pro-life, and that's one of the reasons why they went for the national courts. They went to try to federalize this so they could circumvent the movement that was happening in the country, which was a pro-life movement. And so several liberal justices decided to say, well, no, there's a right to kill your child within the womb. But that's basically what's going on. That's the case. And even if this case is resolved where Roe v. Wade is overturned, that doesn't mean abortion is going to be illegal in America. There's some states that have already created laws that are the most egregious. They're even beyond the precedent of Roe v. Wade, because in New York now, you can kill your child in New York to the 9th month, and even if it's born alive. And they were cheering that. We've talked about that on this program. It's euthanasia. I mean, you're literally butchering children to death in a way where, I mean, it's almost unthinkable that in this country we would cheer that. Do you remember when they used to say abortion should be legal but rare? Well, one of the things that I saw out on the street today was that argument is completely passé. People were wearing signs saying, I've had an abortion, I'm proud to have had an abortion. This idea that it should be legal but rare, that's gone. Okay? You know what I found was odd, again, just kind of reflecting back on what was happening inside the courts. I never, it's always the conservatives that are supposed to be uncomfortable about this decision. And I never hear any of the liberal justices being uncomfortable. And again, conservatives, I'm talking about constitutional judges. Whether they're conservative people or not, I don't know. But their job is to say it's in the Constitution or it's not in the Constitution. And that's all we want them to do. We don't want them to do anything else. They may have all kinds of other opinions. It's not their job. The legislature makes the laws, not the judges. I'm just amazed that these liberal justices never feel uncomfortable about the fact that Roe v. Wade there was no moral precedent, there was no fundamental precedent, there was no legal precedent. It just, out of thin air, they created a constitutional right that didn't exist in the Constitution. I don't understand why they don't feel they should be ashamed of that to some degree. That's just not what the job of a Supreme Court justice is to be about. And I never hear them squirm at all whatsoever. And it doesn't seem like anybody ever asks them a hard question about that. You know, don't you, whether you agree with it or not, whether you think, well, abortion should be legal or not, that's a legislative question. Or you need to amend the Constitution. And so just coming up with a majority on the court to say, well, we want to bypass the amendment process and we want to circumvent the legislative process, and we're just going to make a law that never existed before and make it applicable to the whole country. They should be ashamed of that. But I never hear any of those kind of questions. I always hear that it's the so-called conservative justice is imposing their particular moral view on the country. But anyway, the whole argument too that the government should abandon the most vulnerable. That's the heart of the Mississippi case, the case of viability. Usually, the government's role is to protect innocent life or vulnerable life. But in this one particular instance in America, we say, well, the more vulnerable it is, then you can kill it. And again, it just turns the whole governmental structure upside down. It's supposed to be a protecting organization. Now it actually exposes the vulnerable to real threats to their life. It changes the medical profession from do no harm to actually kill on demand. And again, remember, the abortion industry is a multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar industry in America. When you hear pro-life people talking, man, most of those people are talking and making sacrifices to do it, because they're not making any cash on it. Just think that through for just a minute. But what I wanted to do today is just go out and listen. And so I just walked among the crowd, and I turned my recorder on, and I listened to some of the speeches. I did talk to a couple of people, but I don't think that's something I want to put on. Although I did meet this one lady, and I'll tell you about who she was at the very end. She was precious. And I hope and pray that her work today is honored by God. So I'm going to just stop right now, and I'm going to go to our recording, and we're going to listen in to some of the things that we heard today.
We want our sex-based rights. We are adult, human females.
This is our moment. It's days like today that we all do that work. I want to first thank every one of you who came here today to stand up for life, and I want to thank all of those people, millions of people around this country who have been standing up for life for decades,
This is Steve
who have been
Scalise
working
talking.
since Roe v. Wade to right that wrong. Today is our day. This is what we've been working for. When you look across the street at the Capitol, we've been trying. Every House Republican supports the Born Alive Act that says if a baby's born alive outside the womb, you can't kill that baby and call it abortion. Do you know we don't have one single taker on the Democrat side to support that bill? In the House, elections have consequences. Why we need to keep working. Let's pray that today these justices are hearing this case and remembering that of the three inalienable rights that are listed in the Constitution, the first right is life. Life is why we're here. Life is why we march. It's why we show up. Today is our day. God bless every one of you.
Again, you heard that from Steve Scalise, Congressman Scalise. You know, the first right of an American is the right to life. And listening to the arguments on both sides, it was interesting to hear how they argued what they did. Yeah, one of the things that was amazing to me, what I saw today, was how diverse the pro-life caucus, if you want to, or group was. I mean, it's more diverse than ever, because I saw you had Christians of all swaths out there, and of all ethnicities. But then you had these groups. One of the groups, I don't know that I got I think I edited out some of it, but it was, I went and sat, and maybe I'll post the video on my Facebook account, or LCRL's Facebook account, but they were Atheists for Life, LGBTQ groups for life, and they were pounding the drums. When I went up to them, I thought they were a pro-choice, because they were kind of more boisterous than a lot of the pro-life groups, and they were. And I was trying to figure out, I wonder what their argument is. Now maybe it's for adoption or whatever, but The Atheists for Life, I just thought, see, I mean, and then and like I said, you had all different nationalities, ethnicities, and so I was amazed. And you're probably not going to see that on the news. They're probably not going to show you that. They're going to try to make it a Republican versus Democrat or whatever. And I always tell people, remember, there's 20 million pro-life Democrats. There's a pro-life Democratic group I work with here on the Hill. 20 million folks, that's a lot of people. Fundamentally, we agree on life as a protected class, especially for children in the womb. And I was a little bit shocked at the pro-choice arguments. I didn't find them compelling. They were just power arguments. It's my body, and I can do what I want with it. And so just to hear these arguments, it's my body, it's my choice, I can do what I want. And I'm saying, well, we're not talking about removing your appendix here. We're not talking about removing a tumor. We're not talking about anything like that. In fact, what's interesting to me is those same people are probably telling you that you have to get a vaccine or you can be escorted out of society. Excuse me, but if you're telling me if you want abortion to be legal, then there's no reason why I'm going to let the government stick something into me without my saying yes to that. But that's a topic for another time. But anyway, it was just interesting because it was those kind of arguments of power. And so when confronted by things like, well, science now tells us that the baby is a baby from the very beginning of conception, you don't have the right to just dispose of it as you will. You can call it a fetus, but it is a human being from day one. It doesn't go through the Darwinian ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, or it's just not true. DNA proves it. It's not true. So again, you're confronted by these things, and they just say, well, it doesn't matter. I still have the right to do what I want to do. The other thing is the argument of racism. I heard that argument over and over and over again, and I thought, it's amazing when the very people who are racist make arguments like this, because Margaret Sanger wanted to dispose of African Americans, and she created Planned Parenthood. And as I've said before, she would be amazed today that people are giving money to, as they said today, people of color, and they're disposing of their own children. She would be happy about that. No, what we need is a culture of life, a culture of family, a culture where we incentivize men and women to stay together, to raise their children. This is what our culture needs. Whatever happened to this is our child, male and female, mom and dad, and then when we have struggles, we have an extended family that we look to for help. And even then, we look to our church and our faith family as another tier of help. And the last place we think is supposed to help us is the federal government. Let's listen in real quickly to Vicky Hartzler, because she laid it on the line.
Over 62 million American lives have been taken. It is wrong. It is tragic. It is heartbreaking. But that can all change today. Thanks to the wise actions of the Mississippi Pro-Life Legislature and the courageous leadership of Mississippi General Lynn Finch and her amazing legal team, the U.S. Supreme Court will have the opportunity to right a wrong, to declare that the U.S. Constitution does not grant a right to abortion.
Well, I didn't realize that in Mississippi, a woman is the one who argued for the pro-life position. Again, they don't talk about that.
We are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, including the right to life. We are reminded of the powerful and convicting words Moses spoke to the nation of Israel and declare the same charge to the 9
Choose life, I bet. Ready?
These arguments and who hold the fate of thousands of lives in their hands. This day, I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you that I have set before you life and death. Now, choose life!
Well, I think she said it right. If the Supreme Court does its job and overturns Roe, the cultural issue is still going to be, are we going to be a culture of life? Are we going to honor moms and dads? Are we going to look at children as blessings? My big concern was this notion of whose child is it? I even heard pro-life speeches that were vehemently pro-life. that we're also saying we live in a country that should be able to allow us to have unlimited family leave, that should allow us to be able to feed our children, that should allow us to be able to have government resources for our children until they're 18 years old and out of the house, and on and on and on. And I thought, wait a minute, whose child is this? If you have a child, the first thing it's just foreign to me that the first thing you think about is, how will the government give me money to raise my child? That's just not how you should think about these things. It should be, how can my husband and I, or how can my wife and I raise this child? And if we need help with that, how can we talk to the grandparents and our families? And how can we, deal with the wisdom that comes from our church and our church family to do this? You don't think, your first instinct is not to say, how can the government or the society take care of my child? Because a culture that doesn't honor families that take care of their own children and doesn't incentivize that is a culture that cannot last. Because you cannot have a culture of self-centered, self-focused individuals doing whatever they please and occasionally having children on the side. That culture is not, that's one of the reasons why we see the kind of vulgarity in our culture. That's one of the reasons we see the violence, the illiteracy, and children are the ones that suffer, and women are the ones that suffer in that society. So that was the first thing. I heard even major pro-life voices saying some of that. And to me, the church then has to make the case that the family, the extended family, and the church, that's where life is to be nurtured and life is to be cherished. And so, within that structure, people should be looking for the support and resources they need. And honestly, the government, if at all, it should be at least a last resort, and it should have a very limited role to play. And so hopefully we'll see, the DOBBS case, I think will at least start to unravel the constitutional cover for this, and it will force all of us again to ask the question, what kind of society do we want to be? Whose children are they? And who's supposed to raise our children? Who's supposed to feed our children? Who's supposed to do that? And a society that roots those questions in fathers, mothers, family, extended family, and church, I think that's going to be a stronger society. And one that roots all those questions in the government will take care of your children. That's not going to be good for families. It's not going to be good for communities. And it's going to ultimately be terrible for children and for women too. And so we'll just see what happens. But the DOBBS case was argued today in the Supreme Court. It was a crazy day in Washington, D.C., and we were here. So let's listen one last time. My final reflections when I was out among all the speeches, out among the, all the people on the steps of the Supreme Court, listening into all these things. Let's listen in one last time to what it was like to be there. Yeah, it's amazing. I'm listening to one person say abortion is murder, and another person saying that abortion is health care. Well, not for the baby, it isn't. Oh, man. The Supreme Court, whatever it is doing inside, the argument of children, family, raising children, responsibility, caring for our community, family, church, not government, that is not going to be decided by the Supreme Court. And I'm listening to all these different people, even people against abortion, who still don't think the family is the main place to raise children. So it's an interesting coalition of pro-life people here today. They're not all Christians, that's for sure. In that sense, it's kind of amazing. And that's the way it was on the steps of the Supreme Court on December 1st. We'll see what happens when they rule in June. There was all kinds of voices on the Hill today, but above all, this was a political day. This was a political day about what fundamental rules we should have in our society and whether or not we will be a tolerant society for the sake of all, including the child in the womb. And there was one person who, in the middle of all of this stuff, she really encapsulated a preciousness that in fact, I'm going to post her picture on the Facebook channel for the LCRL. But it was amazing. She was walking around. She had this beautiful, beautiful picture of Jesus that she was holding up. And I came up to her and I said, "Hey, can I take a picture of that?" And she said, "Okay." And then she actually said, "Please take a picture of this before the Supreme Court." She did not want to be in the picture. It's the kind of person she was. But what was amazing is I said, "You know, you have a real countenance about you," I told her. And I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Well, I'm walking around." And I just said to her, aren't there crazy voices here?" And she said, "Yeah, there are." And I said, "Look at those people even who are holding signs saying, 'I had an abortion and I'm proud of it.' And it's just crazy to me." And she said, "Well, those are the people that I walk up to." And I said, "Well, what do you do?" And she said, "Well, I asked them, 'Do you have any regrets for having your abortion?' And, you know, I get all kinds of answers. Some actually say yes, kind of. And some get, very upset with me. And I just immediately say to them, because I have regrets for the abortion that I had. Yeah, she didn't shy away from the wrongs of abortion, but then she was able to talk to people about the mercies and the forgiveness that come from the God who really, really loves them. The one who says no and the one who says yes. And she had this precious, precious countenance about her. And so I just tell you, when it comes right down to it, I really do mean this. The Supreme Court has a role to play. They're supposed to make sure that what's constitutional is constitutional and what's not is not. And Roe v. Wade is not constitutional. But when it comes back to what kind of society are we going to be, we need to be one that cherishes life, not just our own life, but the life of others. And there's certain Rubicons we cannot cross. And so there is that sense where we take responsibility for who we are to one another, and we cherish the lives of others, and we cherish the lives of the most vulnerable among us. And so even if the Supreme Court does this job, and I hope that they do, of cherishing life from a legal perspective, the church has a role to play to really extrapolate what that really means from God's perspective. The God who created us, the God who orders our lives, and the God who even redeems us just because he loves us. With regard to that, there is going to be plenty of work to do. We were there, and we were taking it all in, and we wanted to report to you the way it was on the steps of the Supreme Court. Amazing to see the diversity in the pro-life crowd. It really, really was. And I hope that you hear that on the news. But if you didn't, you're hearing it from me. Thanks for tuning in today. To get to know our LCRL DC work better, check out our website at lcrlfreedom.org. Contained there are resources to empower your public square dynamic discipleship. Or check out our weekly Word from the Center opinion piece every Friday at facebook.com/LCRL Freedom. Till next time, God bless you always. I'm Gregory Seltz. Have a great week.
You've been listening to Liberty Alert with Dr. Gregory Seltz, Executive Director of the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty in Washington, D.C. This program has been brought to you by the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty.